Chapter 4 of Explorers and Travelers by Adolphus W. Greely. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by William Tomko. Chapter 4. Captain Robert Gray, the Discoverer of the Columbia River. Within the past century, no American explorer has contributed more materially to the welfare of the United States and to its maritime glory than Captain Robert Gray, the discoverer of the Columbia River and the first circumnavigator who carried the flag of the United States around the world. Robert Gray was born at Tiverton, Rhode Island, in May, 1757, and in early youth, inspired with the spirit of independence which dominated the American colonies, entered the naval service during the War of the Revolution, wherein he served with credit as an officer. At the termination of the war, it is probable that he continued his natural or acquired vocation as a seaman. At all events, we find him first and foremost among that band of American citizens whose courage, energy, and nautical skill enabled them to attain unsurpassed success as whalers and sealers in the Antarctic Ocean, as traders dealing direct with China, or as explorers and fur dealers on the unsurveyed and dangerous coast of Northwest America. In 1787, J. Barrell, S. Brown, C. Bulfinch, J. Darby, C. Hatch, and J. M. Pintard, merchants of Boston, associated for the purpose of combining the fur traffic of the northwest coast of America with the silk and sea trade of China. For this purpose they sent, under the command of Captain John Kendrick, in 1787, the ship Columbia and the sloop Washington, with cargoes of blankets, knives, iron bars, and other articles suitable for the northwest trade. They were provided with sea letters issued according to a resolution of Congress, with passports from the state of Massachusetts, and with commendatory letters from the Spanish minister plenipotentiary to the United States. Captain Kendrick, who commanded the Columbia, was a man of marked ability and great energy, who withal had most enthusiastic opinions as to the future of the Pacific Coast region, which he believed would, in a few years, utterly dwarf the growing importance of the Atlantic seaboard. Gray was the master of the Washington, and his professional standing in the eyes of the merchants of Boston was shown by his designation as the most desirable officer to assume command in case of death or injury to Captain Kendrick. Many aspersions have been cast by English writers on the policy pursued and methods followed by Americans engaged in trading with the Indians of the northwest coast of America. Doubtless such reflections were justified in individual cases of Americans, as of traders of other nationality, but the instructions given by the merchants of Boston to Kendrick and Gray show that fair, honest, and peaceful methods were regarded as the true means of establishing a permanent and profitable trade. Among other injunctions were the following: If you make any fort or any improvement of land on the coast, be sure you purchase the soil of the natives. Let the instrument of conveyance bear every authentic mark that circumstances will admit. We cannot forbear to impress on your mind our will and expectation that the most inviolable harmony and friendship may subsist between you and the natives, and that no advantage may be taken of them in trading, but that you endeavor by honest conduct to impress on their minds a friendship for Americans. While enjoining peace, it was not to be a peace on any terms, for thus runs the instructions: The sea letters from Congress and this state you will show on every proper occasion, and although we expect you will treat all nations with respect and civility, yet we depend you will suffer insult and injury from none without showing that spirit which becomes a free and independent American. The vessel sailed from Boston September 30th, 1787, via the Cape Verde and Falkland Islands, and in January doubled Cape Horn, when they thought the perils of storm were past. In latitude 59° south, however, a violent gale arose, which not only separated them, but also seriously damaged the Columbia. The storm over, Kendrick found himself in a sad plight, his consort gone, perhaps lost, his ship in an unseaworthy condition, and the nearest spot for repairs 1,000 miles distant. This port, that of the island of Juan Fernandez, if now famous and delightful to the adventurous mind through its associations with the fascinating tale of Robinson Crusoe, was then most objectionable from the fact that it was under Spanish rule, and so was to be avoided by Kendrick, whose instructions ran as follows: "You are strictly enjoined not to touch at any port of the Spanish dominion on the western continent of America, unless driven there by unavoidable accident, in which case you are to give no offense to any of the subjects of his Catholic Majesty." Kendrick, to his surprise, was received with great kindness, and aided in repairing his injured vessel by Don Blas Gonzales, the humane commandant of the Spanish garrison of Juan Fernandez. Spain at this time claimed the right of exclusive jurisdiction over the entire western continent of America by virtue of the Papal Concession, 1493, and by right of discovery. It had failed to colonize the northwest coast of America, but it prohibited other nations from entering in possession. It now illustrated its narrow and jealous policy in its treatment of a subordinate who had ventured to assist a vessel in distress and provided with letters from the accredited minister of Spain to the United States. Ambrose O'Higgins, then Captain General of Chile, under whom Gonzales was serving, on hearing of this act recalled him and put him in arrest, pending definite orders from his own superior, Theodore Lacroix, Viceroy of Peru. After due consideration of the case, the unfortunate commandant, Gonzales, was cashiered for his remissness in allowing a strange ship to leave Juan Fernandez instead of seizing her and her crew. The Viceroy set forth to the Captain General of Chile the legal opinion that by the royal ordinance of November, 1692, every foreign vessel found in those seas without a license from the court of Spain was to be treated as an enemy, even though belonging to a friend or ally of the king. Seeing that no other nation had, or ought to have, any territories to reach which its vessels should pass around Cape Horn or through Magellan Straits, the Viceroy therefore sent a ship from Callao to track or intercept the Columbia. The authorities on the coasts of Peru and Chile were especially enjoined to be vigilant, and in case any foreign vessel should appear in the country, to seize her. Under Gray's skillful handling, the Washington escaped unharmed from the hurricane, and continued his course toward King George Sound, the concerted rendezvous he made the American coast, about 46° north, in August, 1788. Here he barely escaped loss of his vessel in trying to cross the bar of an unknown river, probably the Columbia, when his ship grounded. He, however, visited shore, and found that the sea was perchance the less inhospitable of the two, for he was so savagely and violently attacked by swarms of Indians that he was very glad to escape therefrom with one seaman dead and the mate wounded. Quitting this unfortunate place, he sailed north and entered Nootka Sound, Vancouver Island, September 17, 1788, where he found two English vessels, the Felice and Iphigenia, sailing under the Portuguese flag, and commanded by Captain Mears and Douglas. There were no signs of the Columbia, but her arrival a few days later relieved Gray from further anxiety in this respect. Douglas's vessel, the Iphigenia, was in serious need of supplies and assistance, which Gray generously furnished. Later he not only made to the northward a successful trading trip, but in the following year, in June, 1789, explored the whole east coast of Queen Charlotte Islands, to which he gave the name of Washington Islands, in honor of General Washington, then President of the United States. In another trading excursion from Nootka Sound, Vancouver Island, Gray entered the broad opening southeast of the island and sailed to the east-southeast 50 miles, where he found the passage still 5 leagues wide. This opening was the Straits of Fuca, and the first authentic exploration of the strait is the account of Gray. The credit of first passing through the entire length of the Straits of Fuca is due to Kendrick, who made the passage in the sloop Washington after the departure of Gray to China on the Columbia. The account of the passage of the Washington through the Straits of Fuca was especially called to Vancouver's attention by the British Admiralty on the occasion of his surveying voyage of 1791, when he was particularly to examine the support strait of Juan de Fuca, said to be situated between the 48th and 49th north latitude, and to lead to an opening through which the sloop Washington was reported to have passed in 1789, and to have come out again to the northward of Nootka. Vancouver later denied to Americans the credit of first sailing entirely through the Straits of Fuca, resting his opinion on Gray's statement that he sailed only 50 miles within it, which was true, the credit belonging to Kendrick in his voyage with the Washington after Gray's departure from the coast in 1789. The efforts of Kendrick and Gray resulted in the obtaining of a full cargo of furs, which, in accordance with their instructions, were to be sold in China. Kendrick, fascinated with the prospects of fortune and success, and perhaps reluctant to face his owners owing to his lack of caution which resulted in the unfortunate killing of some 30 natives, decided to remain on the northwest coast, his imaginary El Dorado. Gray consequently transferred to the Columbia and set sail for Canton, then the great fur mart of the world. His voyage across the Pacific was prosperous, his furs were readily sold, and after taking a cargo of tea on board, Gray sailed for the Cape of Good Hope, and on the 10th of August, 1790, the Columbia entered the port of Boston, the first vessel to circumnavigate the world under the flag of the United States. His success and conduct so impressed the owners of the ship that they immediately decided upon sending Gray back to the northwest coast, and 7 weeks later, September 28, 1790, he sailed in the Columbia, which was described as a ship of 212 tons, manned by 30 men, and equipped with an armament of 10 guns. Gray was also provided with a sea letter signed by George Washington, then President, which ran as follows: "To all emperors, kings, sovereign princes, state and regents, and to their respective officers, civil and military, and to all others whom it may concern, I, George Washington, President of the United States of America, do make known that Robert Gray, captain of a ship called the Columbia, of the burden of about 230 tons, is a citizen of the United States, and that the said ship which he commands belongs to the citizens of the United States. And as I wish that the said Robert Gray may prosper in his lawful affairs, I do request all the before mentioned, and of each of them separately, when the said Robert Gray shall arrive with his vessel and cargo, that they will be pleased to receive him with kindness and treat him in a becoming manner, etc. And thereby I shall consider myself obliged. September 16, 1790, New York City. Seal, U.S. George Washington, President. Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State. He further was provided with a similar letter from John Hancock, the governor of Massachusetts. His letter of instructions from the owners, signed by Joseph Barrow, enjoins, in similar and even stronger terms than those given Kendrick 3 years before, friendly treatment, strict honesty, honorable conduct, and the avoidance of unjust advantage in trade with the natives, the shunning of Spanish ports, tender treatment of his crew, urgency of despatch in reaching the northwest coast, and the refraining from all unnecessary connections with foreigners or Americans. It further speaks of Gray's rising reputation, and expresses the belief that a regard for his own honor, and a respect for the sea letter with which the President had honored and indulged him, would cause Gray to doubly exert himself for the success of the voyage. Gray used such dispatch, and was so fortunate that he reached Cape Flattery, at the mouth of the Straits of Fuca, June 5, 1791, his voyage of 8 months having been devoid of any occurrence worthy of note. Proceeding northward to Queen Charlotte Island for trade, he there fell in with Ingraham, formerly mate of the Columbia, but now, July 23, 1791, in command of the Hope. The autumn was spent in trading and exploring among the islands and along the coast to the east and north of Queen Charlotte Island. During one trip, Gray penetrated an inlet near 55° north latitude, probably the northern extension of Vancouver Strait, to a distance of 100 miles to the northeastward without reaching the end of the passage, which he supposed to be the Rio de Reyes of Admiral Fonte. Gray's visit was most unfortunate, for a portion of his crew landing at a port on the mainland in 55° north on August 22nd, a large band of savages fell on the party and killed Joshua Caswell, his second mate, and seamen Joseph Barnes and Job Folgier. This fatal spot was therefore named Massacre Cove. The attitude of the Indians was a matter of constant anxiety, so that Gray and his crew were obliged to exercise the greatest caution in all their intercourse with such tribes as they fell in with. In Pintard Sound, 44° 30' north, near the entrance, an attack was attempted on the Columbia, which obliged Gray to fire on the Indians, whereby 2 of the chiefs were killed, but it did not excite lasting resentment, as these savages traded with him later as though nothing had happened. Returning to Clyoquot, Port Cox, Vancouver Island, with the Columbia, Gray went into winter quarters. The owners had sent out the frames for a sloop of about 30 tons, with 3 carpenters to build the vessel. A fortified habitation, called Fort Defiance, was constructed for occupancy by the working party, which finished and launched the sloop that winter, christening her as the Adventurer. In the spring of 1792, while the crews of the Columbia and Adventurer were preparing for sea, they were visited by many Indians, who, through their chiefs, established such relations with a Sandwich Islander, who was one of the crew of the Columbia, as to excite Gray's suspicions. The Islander, on being closely questioned by Gray, confessed that the Indians had formed a plan to murder the whole party and seize the vessels, the Hawaiian to aid them by wetting the priming of all the guns, and in return be made a chief among the Indians. Gray took immediate steps to keep his crew on their guard during their remaining stay, and thus completely baffled the design of the savages without bloodshed. In April, 1792, Gray, sending the Adventurer northward under command of Haswell, his first mate, turned himself southward, and on the 29th fell in with Vancouver, who was approaching the northwest coast on a voyage of exploration in the English ship Discovery, with the Rambler under Broughton as a consort. Vancouver eagerly sought information from Gray as to his knowledge of the coast, which the American gave fully and cheerfully. Gray set forth his voyages in the Straits of Fuca, around Queen Charlotte Island, and further, that in 1788 he had been off the mouth of a river in the latitude of 46° 10', where the outset or reflux was so strong as to prevent his entering for 9 days. This latter information was most surprising and distasteful to Vancouver, who, fitted out at great expense with 2 vessels for exploration alone, found the accuracy of his own observations of the coast, as recorded in his journal 2 days earlier, thrown in doubt by the statements of this American trader. Vancouver had written before meeting Gray: "The several large rivers and capacious inlets that have been described as discharging their contents into the Pacific, between the 40th and 48th degrees of north latitude, were reduced to brooks insufficient for our vessels to navigate, or to bays inaccessible as harbors. Under the most fortunate and favorable circumstances of wind and weather, so minutely has this extensive coast been inspected, that the surf has been constantly seen to break on its shores from the masthead." After hearing Gray's relation, Vancouver wrote: "If any inlet should be found, it must be a very intricate one, and inaccessible to vessels of our burden. I was thoroughly convinced, as were also most persons of observation on board, that we could not possibly have passed any safe navigable opening harbor or place of security for shipping on this coast." Later, Broughton, by Vancouver's orders, entered and surveyed a part of the Columbia in the latter part of October, 1792, when, very much to his surprise, he found himself preceded by another American trader, Captain Baker, master of the brig Jenny, of Bristol, Rhode Island. Vancouver's report of the Columbia is scarcely creditable to that great navigator, for he attempted to prove that the mouth of the Columbia is an inlet separate from the main river, and that Gray is consequently not entitled to the credit of discovering the main river, a misstatement that cannot stand either in light of Gray's journal or the hydrography of the river. Doubtless Gray was sufficiently irritated by Vancouver's doubts and criticisms as to the existence and navigability of the unknown river. to cause him to again venture the dangers which had so nearly caused the loss of his vessel on his previous visit. Of it Wilkes wrote: "Mere description can give little idea of the terrors of the bar of the Columbia. All who have seen it have spoken of the wildness of the scene, the incessant war of the waters, representing it as one of the most fearful sights that can possibly meet the eye of the sailor." Gray pursued the even tenor of his way to the southward, and within 2 weeks justified his previous statements by not only entering and navigating the Columbia, but also discovered a haven, Bulfinch, or Gray Harbor, affording safe anchorage and shelter for small vessels. The following extracts from the log book of the ship Columbia give the account of Gray's discoveries in his own words: 1792, May 7th, 10 A.M. Being within 6 miles of the land, saw an entrance inland which had a very good appearance of an harbor. At 3:30 bore away and ran in northeast by east, sounding from 4 to 5 fathoms, sandy bottom, and as we drew nearer in between the bars had from 10 to 12 fathoms. Having a very strong tide of ebb to stem, many canoes came alongside, and at 5 P.M. came to in 5 fathoms of water, sandy bottom, in a safe harbor, well sheltered from the sea by long sand bars and spits. Our latitude observed this day 46 degrees 58 north. This harbor, called Bulfinch by Gray, now properly bears the name of its discoverer. 10 May. Fresh breezes and pleasant weather. Many natives alongside at noon. All the canoes left. At 1 P.M. began to unmoor, took up the best bower anchor, and hove short on the small anchor. At 4:30, being high water, hove up the anchor, and came to sail and a beating down the harbor. 11. At 7:30 we were out clear of the bar and directed our course to the southward along shore. At 8 P.M. the entrance of Bulfinch Harbor bore north, distant 4 miles. The south, one extreme of the land, bore south-southeast, 1/2 east, the north ditto, north by north by northwest. Sent up the main top-gallant yard and set all sail. At 4 P.M. saw the entrance of our desired port, bearing east-southeast, distance 6 leagues, in steering sails and hauled our wind inshore. At 8 P.M., being a little to the windward of the entrance to the harbor, bore away and run in east-northeast between the breakers, having from 5 to 7 fathoms of water. When we were over the bar, we found this to be a large river of fresh water, up which we stood. Many canoes came alongside. At 1:11 P.M. came to with the small bower in 10 fathoms. Black and white sand. The entrance between the bars bore west-southwest, distance 10 miles. The north side of the river, a half-mile distant from the ship, the south side 2½ miles distance, a village, Chinook, on the north side of the river, west by north, distance 3/4 of a mile. Vast numbers of natives came alongside. People employed in pumping the salt water out of our water casks in order to fill with fresh water which the ship floated in. So ends. May 14th, sailed upwards of 13 or 15 miles, when the channel was so very narrow that it was almost impossible to keep it. Ship took ground, but she did not lay long before she came off without any assistance. The jolly boat was sent to sound the channel out, but found it not navigable any farther up, so of course we must have taken the wrong channel. 15 May. In the afternoon, Captain Gray and Mr. Hoskins, in the jolly boat, went on shore to take a short view of the country. 19 May. Captain Gray gave this river the name of Columbia's River, and the north side of the entrance, Cape Hancock, the south side of the entrance, Adams Point. The day following, 20th, Gray left the river, crossing the bar after several attempts, and sailed northward to rejoin the Adventurer. Completing his cargo of furs, Gray again visited Canton, and by his former route returned to Boston. He married on the 4th of February, 1794, and died while in command of a coasting vessel in the summer of 1806 at Charleston, South Carolina, leaving a wife and 4 daughters. On March 27, 1846, a committee of Congress considered a petition of Martha Gray, his widow, who applied for a pension for his services to the United States in war and as an explorer. The committee in question considered that the most suitable return for Gray's valuable services would be the grant of a township in Oregon, but as surveys had not yet been made, it deferred such action as then inexpedient. It recommended, however, that Congress should pass a bill giving Mrs. Gray the sum of $500 per annum. In its report, the committee said that Gray was the first discoverer of the country, that such discovery conferred on the United States a title to the whole basin drained by the river, known then as Oregon Territory, that the hazard and labor of the journey were great, especially in the unsurveyed bar of the Columbia. Americans did not confine their title to the valley of the Columbia to the mere right of discovery without occupation and use, but they proceeded to develop its capacities for trade and settlement. From the year 1797, American vessels regularly entered the Columbia and traded with its natives. When in 1826 the rights of the United States in regard to Oregon were formulated and made the subject of consideration by plenipotentiaries on the parts of Great Britain and the United States, the claims of the latter were urged on 3 grounds, the most important or first being from their own proper right, which was founded on Gray's discovery of the Columbia River. If Vancouver had discovered the Columbia prior to Gray, it is impossible to say what complications and results would have arisen in connection with the extension and development of the United States. It is therefore a source of endless gratification that Captain Robert Gray, by his courage, enterprise, and seamanship in discovering and entering the Columbia, ultimately secured to the United States this fertile territory, almost twice as extensive in area as Great Britain. With its 660,000 of inhabitants, its great cities, its enormous accumulations of wealth, the young empire added to the United States through Robert Gray is fast shaping into substance the golden visions of the enthusiastic Kendrick. End of chapter 4. Recording by William Tomko.